Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. We'll begin with chapter 33, verse 5. We were discussing this pasuk yesterday, and it says that when there will be in Yeshurun a king. So we mentioned yesterday that a king could refer to Hashem, of course, as the king of all, or the king could refer to Moshe, the one who conveys Hashem's laws to the Jewish people. But what's Yeshurun? So Yeshurun is clearly a reference to the Jewish people, but what does the word mean? So what we discussed yesterday with the Ramban is it's a language of Yashar, that it's incumbent upon the Jewish people to act in a way that everyone is doing the correct thing and acting straight. Just want to share with you the Kli Yakar, who has a different approach. Kli Yakar on Pasuk Hey, by Hivi Shurun Melech, Bein Shekoya LaKadosh Baruch Hu, Bein Al Moshe. Whether the intent of the verse when referencing the king is God or Moshe, Kach Perusho. This is the meaning. Ki Yeshurun Lashon Re'iyah. He says that Yeshurun is a language of sight, of vision. We can all, I'm sure, come up with all kinds of examples that it's common in this world for people to reach prominent positions, even if they really are not appropriate for those positions. Mitzad, Shabrios, Liros Mativo, because people don't look closely at the individuals and they give them prominence when they're really not up to the task. Okay, and that's how they get these positions. They don't have vision. They might see the person in front of them, but they don't really understand. They don't really appreciate who the person is and where they're going, etc. But if they would look closely, they would see that this person, sometimes in life, we have to see the emperor's clothes. And sometimes we see, sometimes even once people are in a position, people are so impressed by them. But if you really understand what's going on, you realize that it's a lot of sizzle and not much steak. Of a Moshe Eno king, but that's not how Moshe is. It says in the pasuk that the Jewish people looked after Moshe, and at least one shot in their looking after Moshe is really kind of checking up on him and looking very closely at him and trying to see, is living the right way. They looked very closely at him and they still didn't find anything wrong with him. So the Kli Yakar says that's the pshat in the pasuk, that it will be among those who look very closely a king. Afilu b'mabitim, that even if people look very closely at Moshe, they'll still realize that he's appropriate to be their king. Certainly it can be said about Hashem. We, our people, have given God all kinds of tests over the years to see his patience, etc., and powers. And everyone understands that God is indeed our king. So that's an interesting shot in the Kli Yakar. Okay, let's go on to verse 6. So now Moshe starts saying brachos. He's going tribe by tribe. Let Ruvain live and not die. Vihi misvav, vihi misav, mispar, and his numbers should count among his brothers. That seems to be the way Rashi understands it. And then it goes on to Yehuda, and then it goes on to Levi. So first of all, it's interesting to think about what the order here is of these tribes. They're certainly not being conveyed in birth order. That's the first thing. But the other thing that really jumps out is if you look through the list, there's a tribe that was omitted. And that tribe is Shimon. Shimon is not mentioned on the list. So it's an obvious question. Why is Shimon not mentioned on the list? And perhaps a less pressing question is, why is the order of the tribes what it is? So let's look at the Ramban on Pasuk Vav. Ramban on Pasuk Vav, Yechi Ruvain live. Amar Reb Avram. The Eben Ezra explains, Ki heichel meRuvain shehu abachor, that Moshe begins from Ruvain because Ruvain was the first of the tribes. Now, it's always interesting. Are we talking about the patriarch of the tribe, or are we talking about the tribe? When you say Ruvain, you could either mean the human being who was Yaakov's son, or you could mean the tribe of Ruvain. But the bottom line is, even if it means the tribe of Reuven, the patriarch of the tribe of Reuven was the firstborn. So it makes sense to start with Reuven. Below Hiskir Shimon. Now the Ibn Ezra says that Shimon was not mentioned. Bavur Avon Hapaur. Ki ha'ovdim hayu Shimonim umisparam le'ed. Gam Nesiam Nerag. So the Ibn Ezra and other Mefarshim, including Rashi, say something very interesting over here. And what they say is that Moshe doesn't mention the tribe of Shimon because the tribe of Shimon was very, very much wrapped up in the sin of being involved with the women of Moab and doing Avodah Zarah to Peor. If you remember the story with Pinchas, which again, Pinchas feels like a very long time ago, but Pinchas was really at the end of the book of Bamidbar, and one of the last parshios of Bamidbar. Remember that this whole book of Dvarim that we're wrapping up now was basically a day in the life of Moshe Rabbeinu talking to the Jewish people. So in terms of the timeline of things, something that happened at the end of Bamidbar was very recent. So the last great sin the Jewish people committed in the life of Moshe Rabbeinu was this double of getting involved sexually with women from this other nation, and the women persuading the men to worship Avodah Zarah. Says a number of the commentators, the tribe that got primarily wrapped up in that sinful conduct was the tribe of Shimon. And since they were wrapped up in that sinful conduct, Moshe neglected to give them a bracha. Moshe declined to give them a bracha. Pretty scary. Now, how do you know? What's the basis to say that they were the primary group involved with the sin? Well, the Ibn Ezra says two rationales. One is there's this famous story. The reason we know Pinchas' name so well is Pinchas kills a head of tribe who was publicly having relations with a non-Jewish woman. Which tribe was he head of? He was head of the tribe of Shimon. So that certainly, in other words, it's hard to believe that a tribe that was rejecting this sinful conduct would allow its leader to be publicly doing this. So must be, says the Ibn Ezra, that the tribe was very wrapped up in this in the first place. And says the Ibn Ezra, we have different counts of the numbers of Klal Yisrael throughout different times. He says, if you note that the count that happens after that sin, the tribe of Shimon is pretty small in number. So he says, you know why the tribe of Shimon was small in number? Because a number of people from the tribe of Shimon died in a plague because so many of them committed the sin. So this is the Ibn Ezra's rationale. This is Ibn Ezra's explanation as to why Shimon's not mentioned, and what his theory is as to how he knows that the tribe of Shimon was so involved in this sin in the first place. Says the Ramban, Ulfidati ein misparam raya. I don't think you can bring a proof from the number. Even if you tack on all the people who died, and the Torah tells us a certain number of Jews died in the plague. It doesn't tell us what the tribe by tribe breakdown was of those deaths. But even if you assumed that all of the people who died in the plague were from the tribe of Shimon, there's still 13,000 short of other tribes. So the Ramban says, so how do you understand why they're so much smaller than other tribes in the first place? There must be other factors. Sorry, it's not that they're 13,000 short, it's that they're 13,000 short of the last count of them. By the way, people from Ephraim were thousands less, people from Gad were thousands less. Psukim in the aftermath of this sin seem to refer to the matter as a national issue, not an issue restricted to one tribe. So the Ramban feels very strongly that we don't have a right to conclude that Shimon was more wrapped up in this sin than other tribes because of the numbers. You can't bring proof from the numbers. Skipping a significant part of the Ramban now, it's probably around 20 lines, maybe 25 lines, 30 lines. In mine, it's a new paragraph. What I think the pshat is, Ki lo yimne b'shivtei Yisrael rak shnei masar. I find this to be a fascinating thing. This issue comes up numerous places in Chumash. Says the Ramban, the tribes of Israel are always referred to as 12. Whenever you see the tribes referenced, it's always 12. Yaakov had 12 sons. Now, but it's interesting, if you really think about it, how many tribes were there among the Jewish people? 13, because Yaakov had 12 sons, but Yosef's tribe broke into 2 tribes. That was his reward. And yet, the tribes are never referred to as a group of 13. Yaakov, there's a lot of interesting parallels between Moshe's blessings at the end of his life in this parsha and Yaakov's blessings to his sons at the end of his life in Parshas Vayechi, and there's an emphasis there that there were 12. So the way Yaakov deals with the 12 is he doesn't do Ephraim and Menashe getting separate brachos. He gives Yosef a bracha. So that's how he deals with 12. Moshe, on the other hand, decides to reference Ephraim and Menashe as 2 different tribes. This was for 2 reasons. I mean, when Yaakov is talking to his sons, he has 12 sons. So it makes sense that he refers to Yosef, and Ephraim and Menashe are included in that. Moshe's not talking to his sons. Moshe's talking to the tribes of Israel. Ephraim and Menashe are considered separate tribes when it comes to the dedication of the Mizbeach. They were heads of each of those 2 tribes who brought things. When it comes to the flag and the flags and the formation of camping in the desert, when it comes to splitting up the land and inheritance, for all these halachos that are discussed in different ways in the Torah, Ephraim and Menashe are different entities. So how in the world could he not treat them as 2 different tribes when he gives brachos to the tribes? By the way, Moshe talks about Yoshua, who will be the one who will divvy up the land once they get into Israel. Yoshua was from the tribe of Ephraim. So he's designating the person who's going to be in charge, and that person's tribe doesn't even get mentioned. That would be bizarre. This sounds like like family politics. But once you mention Ephraim, how can you not mention Menashe, who's Ephraim's older brother? When we talk about the inheritance of the land, Levi doesn't get mentioned with the other tribes because Levi doesn't get land in the same way as the other tribes do. But we're not talking about inheritance here. We're talking about general blessings. So why shouldn't Levi get mentioned? Through the blessings that are given to the tribe of Levi, those blessings spread to all the Jewish people. That's Birchas Kohanim. The Kohanim are a subset of Levi. The Kohanim bring these sacrifices and offerings. So there's only 12 that are going to get mentioned. Who's going to be the odd tribe out? So the bottom line is, the Ramban says it was Shimon that got left out. Just skipping about 10 or 15 lines. So if some tribe is not going to be mentioned, we exclude Shimon because Shimon was a small tribe. The reason they were a small tribe is because when Yaakov blessed his children at the end of his life, he said, I'm going to spread Shimon out among Israel because Shimon had done not such good things with Levi. The idea is that all the blessings of all the tribes should go on everybody. He's just mentioning uniquely this tribe connects to this blessing, this tribe connects to this blessing. So the basic idea that the Ramban is setting forward is that it's not a statement that Shimon was sinned and therefore was excluded. It's just that, like everything else, we just want to talk about 12, and Shimon was a small tribe. So therefore Shimon doesn't get mentioned here. But certainly Shimon are included in the brachos given to all the tribes. So we discussed the Kli Yakar's idea about Yeshurun this morning, and we discussed the Ibn Ezra and the Ramban regarding the exclusion of Shimon.